Oliver Scholars CEO Salon Series with your host, Dr. Danielle Moss Cox. On this episode, as we commemorate Black History Month, we'll discuss building generational Black wealth and creating a legacy plan with subject matter experts Johnny Arujo, Terry Ann Burrell, and Sabrina Lamb. Let's talk.
Hello, and welcome. What's up? Que pasa? How are you? Happy Black History Month. Thank you so much for joining us. Black generational wealth, it's in the news constantly, whether you're talking about home buying or paying down student loans. This subject has been a hot topic in recent years, and we thought it was worth tackling. So, let's begin by introducing our guests. First, we have Johnny, who is an alum of the Oliver Scholars Program. Johnny, do you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Sure. Hi, people. My name is Johnny Araujo. Oliver Scholar Class of 09, graduated from Ethical Culture Fieldston School, very long name. And right now I'm a lead software engineer at a consulting company called Giant Machines. We basically partner with companies of all sizes to help them figure out what solutions they want to bring to the market, help them refine it, actually deliver it, and then help them grow and scale it. So I can't name names, but one of the projects I'm working on right now, they're in the healthcare space, and we started literally from nothing, and right now they're grossing $300 million a year. So it's been pretty cool to be a part of that journey. I'm also a recent homeowner. I bought my first house last June. So my wife and I, we're still getting settled almost a year later. It's been a fun ride, and I'm looking forward to participating in this conversation and kind of sharing some of the things I've learned along my journey.
Thank you so much. Johnny also failed to mention that he's a member of the Oliver Scholars Alumni Council, where he has a leadership role. Terry Ann, can you introduce yourself?
Happy to. Thanks so much for having me. Hello, everyone. Terry Ann Burrell, class of 95 from Andover. I am an Oliver Scholars, and I also recently joined the trustees for the Oliver program, a position I am super excited about, and really honored to be able to engage with the program in a different way. In my day job, in addition to being a wife and mom to 3 kids, I am also a chief financial officer for a publicly traded biotech company. And prior to actually joining that company, I spent a long time on Wall Street, most recently at JP Morgan, where I was a managing director in the healthcare investment banking group. Really excited to have this conversation today. Given the many layers and also the complexity, I think, that comes with growing into a new generation and how we engage with our own children and families about creating these opportunities for them without having them compromise their work ethic and their commitment to community as well.
Thank you so much, Terry Ann. And again, thank you for agreeing to be part of this conversation. And now we have my homegirl, Sabrina Lamb, who is the founder and chief executive officer of World of Money. Sabrina, do you want to talk a little bit about your work?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me here. Really impressed by the legacy of impact with Oliver Scholars. As introduced, I am Sabrina Lamb, the founder and CEO of World of Money, the leading provider of immersive financial education for children ages 7 to 18. We serve children not only here in New York City, but in the United States, as well as 4 African countries, leveraging the power of technology. And I'm also the founder and the CEO of Wakeza, which is Swahili for invest. It is a Black-owned, Black woman-led invest fintech with the foundation of financial education for adults.
I love it. So, so I'm just going to tell you all that I come from a legacy of the struggle bus, right? My grandmother on my father's side is African American, worked 3 jobs for the better part of 20 years to pay for her own home in Northwest Washington, D.C., right? So there's that legacy of home ownership, but through enormous personal struggle and strength. And on my mother's side, I come from Bajan and Antiguan immigrants. My grandparents didn't own their own homes. I don't think that they saw it as part of their legacy. But both of my grandfathers owned small businesses and struggle, and my father too, actually. And they all struggled to get investments in their business. And so they never kind of got beyond just being able to sustain themselves. So I think this is going to be an amazing conversation. Starting with anyone, what is generational wealth and why do you think this has become such a hot topic in our community of late? Don't all run at once.
Don't all run at once. I'm happy to start, although I think when so many of us think about generational wealth, we think about the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Kennedys, and those are all, I think, the extreme examples of generational wealth, right? People who were able to amass an unbelievable fortune and pass that on through multiple generations, even in circumstances where some of the generations actually squandered it. It was so sizable that no single generation was actually going to be able to completely undermine it. That's the sort of extreme case. I think the reality is most of us have opportunities to create generational wealth. And it is, in my view, very simply the opportunity to pass on something, whether that be in the form of hard assets like a home, as you mentioned, Dr. Cox, or a business, or stocks and bonds, or even cash, right? Something that can be transitioned to the next generation that will enable them to get a step forward and then potentially transfer that wealth to generations even after that. Maybe I'll stop there and I'll let others chime in before we answer the second part of your question, Dr. Cox, about why it's become such a focused topic.
Johnny and Sabrina, did you want to add anything?
Johnny, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's also important to discuss capitalism a little bit and what role wealth plays in a capitalist society. More broadly, we're kind of taught that this is the way our world works, this is the way money works, and we don't really think too much about why it is we've decided to ascribe to these philosophies. But how we feel about them is also different from how it actually operates, right? And so I think at a core fundamental perspective, capital is the thing that allows people to produce and to quote unquote innovate. And so a lot of our obsession with wealth comes from the fact that wealth is a form of capital, and it's kind of the means to dictate our own freedoms and our ability to earn income outside of what we can exchange our time for. So, we can't take the possessions with us, right? But we can accumulate them over time. And the more we have, the more we can accumulate, because that is how capitalism is structured. If you don't have capital, if you don't have wealth, then you're inherently, I would say, downsizing your ability to participate in the broader economy. So when we talk about why it is, we're so money focused and hustle culture and always on the grind, it's because we're kind of ingrained to think that that's the only way that we can, really carve out an independent path for ourselves. So it's important to understand that if this is the game that we're playing, right, this is the way that we can leverage the system and the resources around us to give us a leg up.
Mm-hmm. So, what is generational wealth? For us at World of Money, it is the accumulation of assets that benefit not only you, but also your family and future generations over time. Now, assets, we have to really be careful to define what is an asset because, for example, I have a closet full of stuff and none of it are assets, okay? Those are liabilities or things that have stuff that has depreciated. And so focusing on those, and since the beginning of time, the assets have been very limited. It's cash, it's stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, entrepreneurship, and philanthropy, as well as commodities as well. And so accumulating those assets and then learning how those assets work, because financial education, financial fluency is very, very key in terms of generational wealth. It has nothing to do with your degree or where you graduated from, because I know of Osceola McCarthy from Mississippi, who when she passed in 1999, she had saved $150,000. She had a fourth grade education. She washed clothes for those people in town. And by the time she passed, she had $150,000 and gave the largest gift to the University of Southern Mississippi. So it doesn't matter about the school that you attended to, is that you understand the power of your currency and focusing on accumulating those assets. And then I threw in there philanthropy, which should be actually centered, because I believe that nothing can enter a closed fist. So giving, you return, you reap returns on that, and teaching children, particularly when they start very, very young, or maybe there is a parent listening, everyone can hit the reset button as opposed to focusing on things as opposed to assets. Liabilities, maybe there's a focus on in terms of assets. And then in terms of the second part of that question, Dr. Cox, was, well, why is it in the news so much? I think it's the advent of social media. Unfortunately, there can be some kind of downsides to that, because a lot of people talking about generational wealth, particularly from the Black community, and giving a lot of advice, but they're not licensed to give advice. Particularly in as regards to securities and so forth. So it has become very fashionable since the advent of when people of African descent were no longer enslaved. With the Freedmen Bank in 1865, we were very keen on saving and, putting deposits in banks, and then Maggie Lena Walker, in the early 1900s, opening up a bank in Virginia. So we have a long legacy. We just don't hear about those heroes and sheroes. They were very keen and had a fluency with the power of money and generational wealth.
Yep. I would also add that I do think that this has become part of the conversation in response to the broader social justice conversation that we have, because the lack of generational wealth within Black and Brown communities, I believe, is actually a social justice issue and is directly tied to the historical context in which African American and other folks have found themselves, for sure. And I don't think we can separate that. And I think that's partly why this conversation has just come to the forefront, because it is hard to talk about the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and those other challenges without fully stepping back and taking into account all of what is contributing to the challenges that we face as a community.
The next question, why don't Black folks in America have generational wealth? I think in the context of some of the social justice conversations that are so prevalent now, the obvious answer for some might be, racism, right? But I think there have been so many myths about Black people's relationship to money that I think we do have to deconstruct a little bit of that history to understand um, why we don't have money. And it has no connection to our work ethic, it has
No.
no connection to our intellect. Um, there have been, they've used violence, they've used policy, they've used every mechanism we can possibly imagine. When I say they, I mean those who have power in this country, to make sure that we didn't have access to resources. But I can tell you, I have been CEO of an organization, not this one, where I was told, despite the fact that I was leading an organization that served Black and Dominican students specifically, that we didn't need to recruit Dominicans for our board because Dominicans don't know how to manage money. And that was one of our largest donors, and someone who continues to be incredibly influential. I don't know. There's something about me that makes people think they can say some crazy things. I
Yo,
don't know what it is.
bring them to me. Tell them I'm the Dominican.
I hear you, Johnny.
Wow.
Yeah.
But really, but I have also seen that manifest in board policies that limit the ability of Black and brown CEOs to just manage the day-to-day operations of an organization. Like that perception, when you see Black folks in corporate America, right? We're going to put you in HR. We're going to put you in a DEI position, which is why I have joined boards and said, no, I want to be on the finance committee. I don't only want to be on the program committee, because everybody on the finance committee doesn't actually work on Wall Street. Right. But it's those subtleties that kind of like undergird that perception that it's not the structural and institutional racism. It is something embedded in us that doesn't allow us to manage resources. So anyway, so that's my 2 cents. But why don't we have generational wealth? Because it's not obvious to everybody, by the way.
I think
There are
it's not,
probably, yeah, I'll let Sabrina go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
no, I think that in the thousands of children that World of Money has served, in addition to their parents, when we have this conversation, there's a tremendous amount of, they feel shame. Parents feel shame, they feel guilt, some of them feel victorious because they're fine, they're very savvy with regard to this. And some of them feel regret that their child maybe, or what they did not learn early as a child. Now, with regard to money. Now, as it relates to, well, why don't we have money? There are some external issues, lack of access to capital, there's redlining. I mean, serious entrenched economic issues in this country that we cannot ignore. And I'm aware of all of them. However, that doesn't, we still need to focus more on how we spend what we have, because we are the first in line for a lot of liabilities. But I understand that sometimes those expenditures is an attempt to fill the emptiness that many parents or adults feel. If I purchase one more bag or one more pair of shoes, that makes me feel whole until that wears off, and then I have to do it again. So we can't ignore the emotional feelings that, particularly those who have been specifically targeted. I mean, it's still happening to this day. But understanding that, one, how we use our money is a reflection of our values, and that we should, because the whole hashtag is Black Lives Matter, or Black Money Matters as well. But how we use our money reflects if we feel that our own life is worth saving. So I believe, can't teach a child to save money, or their parent to save money if they don't believe that their own life is worth saving. We have to go deeper in terms of how that person is feeling.
Yeah. There's different ways to slice it. I agree. There's definitely a present day why, and then like a previous day, go back as far as you want. You brought up Dominicans not managing money. I'm gonna bring it to the Haitian Revolution. Um, the richest colony in the quote unquote Americas. Um, the first one to lead a successful revolt against their colonizers. And despite unifying the island, the Haitians kicked out the French first and then the Spanish afterwards. The French were persistent. They didn't go away, right? So what they did was they basically extorted the new Haitian government. They said, if you want your freedom, you'll have to pay us for it. And it's a debt that Haiti is still paying to this day. I think it was like in the billions of francs at that time. And the only reason they felt that they could do that was because they understood the wealth that was in the country that they were successfully extracting for over 100 years. And they still wanted their cut, right? So that's what you call a wealth transfer, right? I think a big reason that we don't have the wealth that we feel that we should have is because it's been continually transferred away from us. We've lost our agency and our ability to build, create, and retain the assets and artifacts that we have spent our life creating, right? So it can be hard to constantly reset generation after generation when there's always something around the corner, somebody's trying to take it from you. And it's not specific to America, obviously. It's all over the world, and it's not specific to even Black and Brown communities, right? Even within more homogenous societies, you will see that there is a constant class struggle between those who have the capital and who employ the people to work their farms or do whatever kind of labor they need them to do. And then the people who are trying to get by, right? They pit them against each other to keep them down, to keep the owner class kind of shielded from everything else. So can we do something about it today? Absolutely. And we should. And there's things that are not structural, to Sabrina's point, that we can fix right now that's within our own control. But against the context that, we have historically been pillaged, and a lot of those same forces are still into play. So we need to be mindful of them as we figure out our next moves.
And Johnny, I would only add, because I think that those are really important points, is a consequence of that pillaging is an extreme distrust of mechanisms that would allow us to generate wealth, right? Whether that is being a market participant through the stock market or any other means, right? Investing in private companies or taking risks sometimes with our career decisions. Like, there is an inherent distrust which prevents us from taking risks that would accelerate our ability to build wealth that could be transferred to future generations. And that is going to take a lot, right? I think a lot of investment needs to be made to help people who have seen that happen generation after generation to become active market participants.
And to everyone's point, right, when we think about the Tulsa massacre, right, it's like, if we build it, they will literally burn it to the ground before they will watch
Amen.
us thrive and succeed. Sorry. And so I think, it is hard to imagine what the other side of that looks like when so many generations have tried and been unsuccessful. One thing that my paternal grandmother always said that I thought, when I was at Swarthmore and, Swarthmoring, was like, she thought that integration was the worst thing to happen to Washington, D.C. Because the only reason, as a poor single working mother, she wanted to buy her own home was that she was surrounded by other homeowners, right? And her pharmacist was Black, and her doctor was Black, and the teachers were Black. And so you had this social integration across class lines that gave people the opportunity to see something else in real time. And when I was teaching a few years back at City College, excuse me, in their MPA program, I remember this young lady from Brooklyn saying, "Where were you?" And I was like, "Where was I?" And she was like, "I never saw middle-class Black folks come to my neighborhood.
Wow.
I did not know you existed.
Mm-hmm.
How could I imagine something differently?" She was like, "The only reason I went to college was like I was bored one day at lunch, and I've happened to walk past a bulletin board that, had this information about college. Not one teacher in that building told me that that was a possibility for me." And she said, "And I was a good student.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any discipline issues,
Mm-hmm.
but I was completely cut off," right? And so I remember teaching in Bed-Stuy and teaching kids who had never been to Manhattan. And they're like 14 and 15 years old. They've never left their neighborhood. So poverty can be incredibly isolating, and we don't have peace walls like they do in Belfast, but we definitely have a way of messaging to young people where they belong and what they can have access to, which is why Oliver means so much to me, right? It's this idea that we are busting open these walls that have been built to tell young Black and brown young people specifically, which is one of the things I loved about the mission, right? The language even around the mission is so specific, because those are the most excluded, intentionally excluded young people in our communities.
Dr. Cox, you said just a lot of great points. I just wanted to dovetail off of what you just said. In terms of, that young woman who said, no one ever comes. We crave to see ourselves, aligned with power and aligned with access or aligned with content. And that's why, I believe that, telling or teaching our children about the heroes and sheroes that you'll never hear about. From 1899 to his name is Philip Payton, who owned tremendous amount of real estate in Manhattan and Harlem. And so we hear about the sad stories, but also in telling those stories, because, as Terry, you just mentioned about, this distrust that many of us have for financial institutions, but that also leaves the door open for those predatory companies to come in and sit and have a seat in our neighborhood. And that's why we have to call them out too. Because sometimes, because if you don't have a proper understanding, we think, oh, the check cashing place is right there on my corner. It must be fine. It must be legal. It must be ethical. And it's not, because it would never be in other communities. So all of that, those are just some of my thoughts about what you just said, Dr. Cox.
And, I'll just say this, right? When I go back to DC, my grandmother's block, which used to be completely Black, is not completely Black, right? And one of the ways in which gentrification functioned in her neighborhood was tours. People would come through Northwest DC, look for violations on people's houses, and call them in. These were people who had worked their whole lives for their homes. They didn't always have access to the capital to reinvest, to maintain the properties, or to access grant programs that were out there. And so there's definitely a predatory nature to gentrification that I think gets overlooked. Like we think, oh, people just didn't take care of their houses, or they abandoned their houses, or they sold their houses to cash in. And a lot of her neighbors were forced out of their homes because people just decided, you know what, I want this now.
That's
And
happening
I
right
can
now in
use
Brooklyn.
my social capital to take what you worked for. And
That's
that,
happening right now in Brooklyn. Okay,
right.
people are knocking on doors, or if an elder who's lived in a brownstone for decades, maybe moved to Florida or someplace, and there's predators that will go down to City Hall and change that deed into someone else's name. I mean, so that happened years ago with, with your family. It's still happening today. That's why we have to be front and center of what's happening, because what happened to the Freedmen's Bank and those formerly enslaved people when the trustees took over their deposits and invested it someplace else in reckless speculation, and let those people that were just coming out of, entrenched slavery and took all of their deposits. I think that DNA still resonates from the 1800s. I think it's still there, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't participate. We just have to understand how to participate, I think.
Yeah. I think Johnny made a really important point, right? Is that ultimately this capital allows for certain kinds of access, that you need to create more access and more opportunities. So we simply don't have the choice any longer if we want to have agency for ourselves and our communities. And I'd like to think that Black and Brown communities are increasingly understanding their power, right? Especially as we've seen what's happened in the last election cycles, right? The presidential election cycle, as well as the midterm election cycle, right? Those things, I am hopeful, right? And I always say hope is not a strategy, so I will, acknowledge that. But really hopeful that those sorts of things are beginning to demonstrate to us broadly that we have power, and how we can really use that to help each other, help support the community, and achieve some broader objectives. But we've got to be persistent, right? You just can't fall back on, we can acknowledge the trauma, but we can't live in the trauma.
So important. So what can America do to level the economic playing field?
What can they
Feel
do and
free
what
to
will they
include
do? Those are two
reparations
very
in that.
different questions.
I think facing the truth. Terry, just what you just said just sparked something. When we think about social justice and generational wealth, the civil advocacy has been really, really powerful. But I look at the economic, wielding our powers to attack apartheid, save Darfur, economic boycotts, the Montgomery bus boycott, sustain, I'm not logging into so-and-so's website today, but tomorrow I'm back. That's what changes things. And so what America needs to do is almost just understand that we're understanding the power of our dollar, because and until we do that, because thoughts and feelings are just thoughts and feelings, and nobody cares, because that is just the latest episode in the real lives of Black people. Okay. However, when we really understand that over $1 trillion that we are intentional about spending on stuff, and wield that to attack institutions, it'll be a new day in the neighborhood. But hey, are we ready? We can talk about what America needs to do, but I believe I always attack things from what can Sabrina do first. And when we start there, I believe everything will change. But if we're upset today and we're at the store for Black Friday tomorrow, we're back to thoughts and feelings and prayers.
I want to dovetail on what Terrian said regarding trust. I think the single most important thing America, and in particular the government, can do is make tangible efforts to rebuild trust, right? Um, so, what does that look like? For one, it could look like protecting Black wealth, right? A lot of the institutionalized, I would say, like procedure or strategy has been about protecting the wealth of white property owners, right? And while they've brought in kind of who can be protected under that strategy, it's still not very encompassing of the wealth that we have. So, what are things that they can do to help us protect our wealth, right? For number one, they could support more unionization efforts, right? You're talking about we're trying to give people a leg up. Unions are one of the biggest advocates, right? One of the most successful at actually getting increased wages and increased benefits that we can then use to do more things, right? Regardless of where that money goes, right? If we don't have the money, right, we can't save the money. Typically, the issue with our communities is not that we're bad at saving it, it's that we're not earning enough to save in the first place. So anything that the government can reliably do to increase our earning capacity and shield that from other people who are trying to put their own interests above ours, right, would go a long way in actually rebuilding that trust. And then as we, achieve parity as far as capital accumulation, then we can start to actually leverage our positions to enact the change that we're trying to see and cement the change so that it can't be taken down as easily.
And to your point, that's partly what student debt relief is about, right? And we've seen how that's played out. Ultimately, there is a strong push not to do it because I think there is a recognition about what that means practically for people not being dependent, right? Or being able to create other opportunities for themselves, potentially take some risk that they wouldn't otherwise take. Right? Because you can now say, you know what, I don't have to worry about paying 10 grand a month or $2,000 a month. I can take on a role with an entrepreneur, which has the potential to really generate significant returns for me as opposed to going to a sort of normal bricks and mortars experience. And you're seeing the actual pushback around those things.
Are there any policy approaches or reparations has also come up? I've heard Ta-Nehisi Coates talk about reparations. Slaveholders got reparations for lost labor that they hadn't paid for to begin with. The Japanese got reparations, like so many other groups, right, have been afforded some financial recognition of their financial losses. But, and it's interesting going back to this perception, right, that Black folks can't manage money. I've been in chats online, right? And so I had somebody like, what are you going to do with that money? It's like, bro, what are you going to do with your money? You know what I'm saying? Like there's still that that we're still shrouded with this label of incompetence that really was created in the imagination of American caste and racism, right? That doesn't really have like the fact that my grandfather kept his cleaners open in Washington Heights, when people didn't always come get their clothes or they, you might be counting on them to come get all 10 of their suits and they're like, nah, I'm just going to take 3 this week. And he still paid his rent. and he still kept the business going for a long time. To me, that is like magical, financial management, that he was able to sustain himself in that way. My dad had a photography studio in 7th Avenue, and eventually he just was like, if I can't do it at a certain level, I'm just going to give up. But he never recovered from the loss of his business. And I think, my other grandfather had a beverage business up in the South Bronx. And I think, it was the potential of some sort of economic freedom, but also, right, it was not detached from this idea of, I need an escape from the white gaze. Like, I just like, even if I never make more than I need to sustain myself, as Black men, in the times that they existed, just not wanting to, grapple with the white gaze every day, all day, 24/7, especially for my grandfather, who had come from the South and experienced, God knows what. I say that because he wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't talk about what made him leave North Carolina and never look back.
Wow. So you mentioned reparations. I do think, because there are some, I think, really insightful proposals that are on the table from different parts of the countries and country and different organizations. For example, the city of San Francisco, they have a reparations group that has put forth a proposal that every citizen who lived, I think, up into there's a year. In other words, don't move to San Francisco right now because you would not be eligible. Could have $5 million per. I think access to capital. It's like a particular year, maybe over 20 or 40 years. And I think that we kind of need to get on the same page, though, with regard to this. I think reparations can show up with, the student loan debt. I mean, America needs to understand that some of those student loans were predatory from the beginning.
Predatory.
Right. And so those need to be expunged right away, because the other part, probably not going to get your money anyway. So you might as well just, But I think it should be a federal crime that racism and appraisal of real estate needs to be a federal crime. Okay, because many homeowners, Black and brown homeowners, their real estate has been devalued by racist appraisers. I think that the access to capital is really, really important. But I think that it's really important to get on the same page. I think that all of the HBCUs should have equitable funding from their states. It should be a federal, because each HBCU does not have the same access to resources, and it should. And so there's a lot of different keys in terms of this thing called reparations, but it depends on who you talk to or what state or what group it's coming from, what that looks like. But I think there needs to be a unified approach to reparations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I also find interesting that largely the conversations about reparations is happening in places like LA, San Francisco, Boston. It is not happening in, I don't know, Mississippi, Louisiana, right? So there is this.
Is that fear?
Fear or fear?
Fear. Like, I don't know. Mississippi just came out with something where like the state is going to take over the whole judicial system, and I think that was it. And people won't be able to vote for judges. Like, we're going back. Like, I think those of us in these urban centers, we're like kind of seeing it, but I am experiencing a heightened sense of anxiety, really, around how deeply entrenched things are versus where I thought or hoped or wished we would be at this point in our evolution as a country?
I think we should also recognize that you can visit certain parts of our country and it is 1933. Okay. Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the United States, educationally, and particularly in the 10 former colonies. And these people are, trying to drive the clock back in a myriad of ways, but it never moved forward for them. And there's almost a code sometimes in some of these states, that even among Black people, that it's a code of silence. I'm just trying to make a way out of no way, and that's it. So don't come down here with no rah rah. Just go back up north. It's the same.
It is challenging, but I do want to take a moment and just try to be a little bit optimistic, because I do think that there are things that people can do today
Yeah, absolutely.
that will help them. And I think folks who are listening to this are here because I think they're looking for, right, what are some of the small steps? And I think everybody on this phone probably started with taking small steps in order to arrive at the place where they are today and potentially be in a position to pass something on to our heirs. And, for me, it's lived below my means, right? As you think about, that initial set of sacrifices, my parents were immigrants, right? Worked multiple jobs to send the four of us to college. And I graduated with, $120,000 of student loan. And how do you sort of get past that? And it was, I lived at home for a long time. I brought my lunch to work every day. I was actually in the city last week in New York City and stopped to buy lunch. It was the first time in New York City in God knows how long. And it was $18. And it was a salad, right? It wasn't anything fancy. And I thought, oh my gosh, right? If you're doing this and buying coffee twice a day, you're spending $50 a day on food potentially. So just think about those small things do add up, right, over time, and being able to plow that money in to pay that student loan, and then taking that money and sort of reinvesting it in yourself or participating in your 401k plans to get matches. It adds up. You're living 20, 30 years, right? This stuff adds up over time. So those are some of my small steps to take.
Yes, and I learned that in improv class.
Yes.
Yes, do your best to live within your means. I did a lot of the same things that you did, Terry, and living at home, bringing lunch. Matter of fact, I brought lunch to work last week. You know, when you love cooking, your food usually tastes better too. But also, right, acknowledging that a lot of wealth comes from taking risk, right? I'm sure we've all heard the term, high risk, high reward. The quickest way to earn more money is to take a risk and pivot into something that will earn you more money, right? And that's hard. Full stop. That's really hard. It gets harder when you have people to support. All right. I was fortunate enough that when I took a risk and I changed careers, I was living at home and I didn't have any kids to support. My mother was stable, my father was stable, my siblings were stable, right? I didn't have the burden of having to look after other people. When you have those burdens, it's still possible, but you just have to work that much harder, right? But regardless, you can't get there without taking the risk. My father was very concerned about me quitting my city job because, uh, common immigrant thing is you work here, if you can get a job that gets you the good pension and the benefits, like you really don't need anything else. And I did not feel like that was the path for me. So he didn't understand it at the time, but when it worked out, right, he said, I'm sorry for saying that. It's, I was projecting, not his words, but he was projecting. And I think it's reflective of how we feel more broadly, is like, we know it's attainable, but we don't know that we can do what it takes to get us there. And the truth is, if this is what you want, you have to put yourself in a vulnerable situation. So if you're committed to that, then that just means you have to prepare for it, right? You have to make sure that you're budgeting, that you understand the costs of everything that you're incurring, that you understand what your return on investing on yourself will be, so that you can maximize the opportunities that are in front of you.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. I left JP Morgan now 4 years ago. We did have 3 kids when I left to go work for a startup biotech company. But I think the fact that we had always lived below our means, and we're dual career household, which helped, but we had always lived below our means and really prepared to be in a position to take a risk, right? Just recognizing, look, I'm going to try this for 5 years. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we're still going to be okay. And I could always pivot back to going back to investment banking if I wanted. But, I think the preparation is incredibly important. And, I think the fact that I had no student loan and, we didn't have any real debt because we had just been methodical about it, helped give me the confidence to say, okay, here we go, right? Let's just jump right in.
Mhm.
So I see a great question. We have about 8 minutes left. So in answering this question, I also want to hear from the three of you. What can I be doing? What can my team and Oliver Scholars be doing now to get our kids ready for the realities they're going to face financially?
Mhm. Right. Well, the way the world works, when you're 18, no matter if you're living at home or not living at home, you are legally responsible for your financial decisions, whether or not anyone told you how to manage money. You're legally responsible. So the response can't be, well, no one taught me what FICO score is, or interest rate, or predatory companies, or not signing something that I haven't read. You're still legally responsible. And I always get asked about, investing, whether that's my company, Wakeza, Acorn, there's several others out there. But I believe, and though I have a fintech, I believe that no one should invest and everyone should invest when you are fluent in what you're investing in. You should know everything about that company. You should understand the risks, the rewards, the CEO, everything about that company. But before we get to the investing, what is our savings plan? Oliver Scholar parents and students, together, I encourage you to meet today and create the savings plan. This is February 21st, 2023. By February 21st, 2024, how much will you have saved as a family together? What can you do to lower the expenses in the household? Do we need 5,000 cable channels? Do we really need those? What kind of subscriptions do we need to really cut off so we can save more? Can we review together our credit? Go to annualcreditreport.com. Every year you go for a medical checkup. Make sure you go for a credit checkup to make sure that your credit report is accurate, and start to whittle away of any expenses or anything that's incorrect on your credit report, so you can increase your credit score. Why? So you can have more options and access. Whether you are maybe a freshman in high school or whatever age, whoever is joining us this evening, determine that you're going to own your own home. Well, how am I going to do that, Sabrina Lamb? Well, there's organizations that can help you hold your hand every step of the way. I think of NACA, NACA.com, .org rather, NACA.org. I have zero relationship with them, zero fiduciary relationship with them. But what they do is they take you, assign you to a counselor, and unpack all of the financials to get you ready to own a home with zero interest and so forth, zero closing costs, all of that. And they're a national organization. Check out NACA. But together as a family, Oliver Scholar families come together and determine, before we go investing, make sure you have at least 3 to 6 months saving. And together that we have more than we have today, but this year, next year, this time, by working together as families.
Yeah. And for those of you who do own your own homes or you have assets, write a will, have an estate plan, right? This is, and you don't need to have a lot, but believe me, if you don't have it, they will take it and you will not pass that on to your family. So just take the time and find some trusted advisors who will help you with that.
Mm-hmm. Because you don't want someone else deciding what your wishes were, and someone who you didn't really even like that much coming in and deciding for you. Okay.
Yeah, I think one thing that we need to normalize is talking about our personal finances. I'm perhaps more free than my wife would like me to be. But if you ask me in a private setting, I'll show you everything I got. And I do it because if we were more comfortable talking about it, we could learn from each other's mistakes quicker, right? We don't have to be ashamed that we made a bet on something and then we lost, I don't know, $1,000, $500, whatever it is. Rich people lose money all the time. It's called taking calculated risk, right? The goal is to figure out how to limit your risk and how to maximize your upside, how to maximize your potential. And you can't do that without talking with other people and being open and exploring resources and, trying things out. We had a question about Acorns, right? I've never used Acorns, but what I know about it is that their model is, I will help you build a habit of putting money away and putting it towards wealth building, right? Whether or not that's actually the right application for you, you need to do the research to figure that out, or maybe talk to a professional. But the concept that you can make this a habit, right? Make it habitual to save money and put a portion of it into a tangible asset that is predicted to growth, right? That's a huge skill. It's fundamental to everything that we're talking about today. And we won't get there if we don't take the time to educate ourselves and educate each other and be open with each other about how we can get to where we want to be.
Yep. The best advice I got when I first started working from a colleague was pay yourself first, right? That 401k, and again, whether it's 1% or 2%, whatever, just do it. Because it really does make a difference longer term. And that was when I was 21, and I'm a lot older than that now.
Yep, she's right. When you look at like the national averages, my mother, my parents split when I was young. And so I kind of grew up in a single parent household from the ages of like 9 to, I guess 18 when I was an adult, right? I lived with her until I was like 26. But she went and got her master's while I was in middle school, and I didn't see her a lot. We relied on my family to help support me while she was studying. But because she got her master's, she was able to earn a higher salary, and now she's retired and she doesn't need me for money. And she didn't make a lot. She was a social worker, right? But the habits that she had and the ones that she instilled with me were save your money, right? Make sure that you're planning for not only a rainy day, but for other things that you're trying to do. We didn't go on a lot of vacations. We barely went on any, right? But we always had something to eat, right? We had our rent and other bills paid for. Those are the kinds of things that, like, once you internalize and habitualize it, right, the other stuff becomes so much easier. So it's less about thinking about, oh, you're inhibited from all these different directions. It's more like, how can I just make the best of what's available to me? Like, who are the people I can really rely on to be my crutch in ways that I can't kind of do things myself? The more we keep to ourselves, the quicker we fall.
Johnny, that was just an excellent point to end our conversation on. Doing so much more with our Oliver Scholars around financial literacy, starting in high school and then into college. I want them to be positioned to thrive. Like, that's why we exist, right? One of the things I keep telling people is we're not here to just get you into a high school, right? Anybody can probably get you into a high school when you come with the kind of grades and background that most of our students come with. But how can we equip you to change the world? Not just the world, but also for yourself, for your family, for your community. And so I want to thank you all for being part of this conversation. And just thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
This Black History Month, we celebrate our scholars and the culture. Our scholars come from a great lineage, a long line of survivors, writers, freedom fighters, innovators, inventors, and talented artists. They work hard daily to prove they are their ancestors' wildest dreams. Each day, our scholars make history by working hard and being the embodiment of scholarship, leadership, and service. With our support, they strive to outdo, outdream, and outshine. And they succeed. What will you do to be remembered? Join the movement. Make a difference.